August 19, 1942. Dense jungle near Taivu Point, Guadalcanal. Second Lieutenant Genjiro Imi recorded observations in his diary that captured the shock many Japanese soldiers felt upon encountering American forces. Through the thick canopy of palm trees, Imi and 916 other soldiers of Colonel Ichiki's detachment had just landed from destroyers, completing a nighttime insertion the Japanese command believed would be the first step toward recapturing Henderson Field. They had been told the Americans numbered perhaps 2,000 men, poorly trained, easily frightened, soft from lives of luxury. Colonel Ichiki himself had dismissed warnings to wait for reinforcements. "These are Americans," he told his officers. "We will sweep them into the sea before sunrise." What none of these hardened veterans of China and Southeast Asia knew was that they were about to encounter something unprecedented in the Imperial Japanese Army: a systematic demolition of every tactical assumption, every strategic concept, and every ideological certainty that defined the Japanese way of war. The darkness that Japanese forces had owned since 1937 would betray them, and the overwhelming superiority in equipment would shatter the myth of Japanese invincibility in close combat. The transformation had begun 2 weeks earlier on August 7th, when 11,000 United States Marines of the 1st Marine Division stormed ashore at Lunga Point. General Alexander Vandegrift's Leathernecks were executing Operation Watchtower, the first American offensive operation of the Pacific War. The island itself was a vision of tropical hell. Guadalcanal stretched 90 miles long, its coastal plain a strip of kunai grass, swamp, and jungle so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet. The humidity never dropped below 90%. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds so dense that men inhaled them. The rivers and streams teemed with parasites and disease. Malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, and tropical ulcers would eventually disable more men than enemy action. But on that first morning, the Marines seized the nearly completed airfield, finding it almost undefended. By nightfall on August 8th, American engineers were already working to complete the runway, which they would name Henderson Field. Within days, the island would become home to what history would remember as the Cactus Air Force. Write in the comments where you are watching us from. I'm very curious. Subscribe for many more interesting stories. The Japanese response was swift and catastrophic for American naval forces. On the night of August 9th, the Battle of Savo Island became the worst defeat in United States Navy history. 4 heavy cruisers, including USS Quincy and USS Vincennes, were sent to the bottom in less than an hour. More than 1,000 sailors died. The surviving Allied naval forces withdrew, taking with them most of the supplies that had not yet been unloaded. The Marines were stranded, cut off, facing a reinforced enemy with barely half their equipment and food. What the Japanese High Command failed to grasp was that Henderson Field had become the key to everything. Control of the airfield meant control of the surrounding seas during daylight hours. Aircraft operating from Henderson could strike any Japanese ship within 200 miles. The Japanese could own the night, sending in troops and supplies aboard fast destroyers in runs known as the Tokyo Express. But when dawn broke, American aircraft ruled the skies. Colonel Ichiki, with supreme confidence in Japanese fighting spirit, decided to attack immediately, rather than wait for reinforcements or intelligence. On the night of August 20th into the early morning of August 21st, he ordered a frontal assault directly across the sandbar at the mouth of what the Marines called the Tenaru River. Japanese doctrine emphasized the superiority of spiritual power and aggressive night attacks to overcome enemy firepower. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers charged across the sandbar, screaming battle cries, running directly into a killing zone the Marines had prepared with methodical precision. The M1917A1 Browning water-cooled machine guns opened fire. These weapons could sustain 600 rounds per minute indefinitely. Those who made it across encountered 37mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister rounds, essentially giant shotgun shells that turned men into shredded meat. The attack continued for hours. As dawn approached, Colonel Ichiki's attack had completely stalled. More than 800 of his men lay dead or dying on the sandbar and in the shallow water. General Vandegrift ordered a counterattack using 5 M3 Stuart light tanks. War correspondent Richard Tregaskis described the scene. It was fascinating to see them bustling amongst the trees, pivoting, turning, spitting sheets of yellow flame. By midday on August 21st, the Battle of the Tenaru was over. Of the 917 Japanese soldiers who had landed, approximately 800 were dead. Marine casualties were approximately 40 killed and wounded. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese soldiers was devastating. They were shocked to learn that an entire regiment had been annihilated in a single night. The Americans had not panicked. They had waited in prepared positions and systematically destroyed them with concentrated firepower. The most devastating revelation was the American material wealth. The Browning machine guns never jammed, and every Marine seemed to carry more ammunition than an entire Japanese squad. Within days of the Tenaru disaster, more Japanese forces were already en route. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto organized a massive naval operation. After naval battles resulted in heavy damage, Japanese command decided to abandon slow transport ships entirely. Instead, they would use destroyers for what became known as the Tokyo Express runs. Between August 29th and September 4th, various destroyers and light cruisers delivered almost 5,000 troops of Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's 35th Infantry Brigade to Taivu Point. The Tokyo Express worked brilliantly as a method of moving men. Destroyers could make the round trip from the Shortland Islands in a single night, minimizing exposure to American air attack. But the method had a critical weakness. Heavy equipment could not be transported this way. Artillery pieces, tanks, trucks, and, most importantly, adequate food and ammunition had to be left behind. This logistical reality would ultimately doom every Japanese offensive on Guadalcanal. General Kawaguchi set September 12th as the date for his assault on Henderson Field. His main effort would approach along an inland ridge that dominated the airfield. What Kawaguchi did not know was that Marine intelligence had already identified this ridge as the most likely avenue of approach. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, commanding officer of the 1st Raider Battalion, immediately understood the Japanese plan. On September 10th and 11th, Edson positioned approximately 840 Marines along the ridge. He selected defensive positions with the same methodical care that had characterized the Tenaru defenses. Machine guns were positioned to create interlocking fire. Mortar crews registered on likely approach routes. Artillery from the 11th Marines plotted defensive fire missions. The ridge itself was a narrow coral spine, approximately 1,000 meters long. It was the perfect terrain for a night attack, but if properly defended, it was also a killing ground. On the night of September 12th, Kawaguchi's forces began their assault. Unlike Ichiki's frontal charge, this was a more sophisticated attack, with infantry infiltrating through the ravines. The fighting was savage and confused. In the darkness, Marines sometimes found themselves engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Japanese soldiers. But the defensive preparations held. When Japanese forces concentrated for breakthrough attempts, Marine mortars and artillery shattered them. The 11th Marines fired more than 2,000 rounds during the night, dropping high explosive shells so close to Marine positions that shrapnel wounded friendly troops. Sergeant John Basilone manned a machine gun position that became critical to the defense. When his gun crews were killed or wounded, Basilone continued firing alone, repelling wave after wave of Japanese attacks. He would later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions. By dawn on September 13th, the attack had failed, and the ridge would forever after be known as Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge. Kawaguchi's second night's fighting was even more intense. But again, American firepower and defensive preparation prevailed. Japanese casualties were staggering. Approximately 830 to 850 Japanese soldiers died on and around Edson's Ridge. Marine casualties totaled approximately 104 killed and over 200 wounded. For Japanese soldiers who survived, the battle represented another profound shock. They had expected to fight other infantry in darkness, where their spirit would triumph. Instead, they encountered artillery, machine guns, and mortars, all concentrated with a precision they could not match. The Americans had prepared killing zones, waited for Japanese forces to enter, and then destroyed them with coordinated fire support. The Arisaka rifle, bolt action, they used was fundamentally outmatched by the American M1 Garand, semi-automatic 8-round capacity. Furthermore, the American M1917A1 Browning, water-cooled, could sustain fire indefinitely, while Japanese machine guns lacked sustained fire capability, a decisive difference in defensive positions. But numbers alone do not capture the horror of jungle warfare on Guadalcanal. The environment itself became a weapon that killed with impartiality. Malaria infected nearly every man who spent more than a few weeks on the island. By December 1942, the 1st Marine Division would report over 8,000 malaria cases. Tropical diseases disabled approximately 2/3 of the division. The Japanese suffered even worse. Their supply situation meant inadequate food from the beginning. Starvation became a constant companion. Medical supplies were almost non-existent. Japanese documents captured later painted a horrifying picture. A medical officer's report noted that more than 60% of the 17th Army's forces were incapacitated by disease or malnutrition. Soldiers were dying at a rate of 50 per day, most from starvation and disease rather than combat wounds. Japanese logistics consisted of whatever could be carried on destroyer decks. Seriously wounded soldiers were often given grenades and left behind to commit suicide rather than burden their units. In late October, the Japanese mounted their largest offensive of the campaign. General Harukichi Hyakutake himself came to Guadalcanal to personally command the operation. The offensive began on October 23rd. 9 Japanese tanks, rare on Guadalcanal, led an assault across the Tenaru River. But American defenders, including elements of the newly arrived 164th Infantry Regiment, were ready. Anti-tank guns, artillery, and an M3 Stuart tank knocked out all 9 Japanese tanks in quick succession. The main assault came on the night of October 24th to 25th. Approximately 5,600 Japanese troops attacked from the south. They faced the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, under Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller. The fighting that night became legendary in Marine Corps history. Artillery from the 11th Marines fired danger-close missions that landed within yards of Marine positions. Offshore, the battleship USS Washington stood by, ready to provide naval gunfire support. By dawn on October 25th, the Japanese offensive had failed. More than 2,000 Japanese soldiers died in the attempt to break through. October 1942 also saw major naval engagements that decisively shifted the balance of power. On the night of November 14th to 15th, The Japanese battleship Kirishima attempted a bombardment, but was intercepted by the USS Washington and USS South Dakota. In a devastating display of American radar-directed gunnery, the Washington put 9 16-inch shells into the Kirishima at ranges where Japanese lookouts could barely see their target. The Kirishima sank with heavy loss of life. More significantly, American aircraft and surface ships destroyed a Japanese convoy attempting to land the 38th Division with heavy equipment. This was the last serious attempt to reinforce Guadalcanal. By December, Japanese command recognized that continuing the operation meant the complete destruction of the 17th Army. They evacuated 10,652 men over 3 nights in early February 1943. It was a remarkable achievement, but it could not disguise the magnitude of the defeat. Japanese forces on Guadalcanal reached a peak strength of approximately 36,000 personnel. Of these, roughly 25,000 to 30,000 died, about 14,800 killed in combat, and 10,000 to 15,000 from disease and starvation. The myth of Japanese warrior superiority had been shattered. The revelation that American forces were not only materially superior, but also tactically competent shattered pre-war assumptions. Japanese officers learned that spiritual power and tactical skill were insufficient against systematic disadvantages in firepower and resources. The Americans had systems for everything: systems for supply, for medical care, for artillery support, for air coordination. Every system functioned. A single American battalion had more effective firepower than an entire Japanese regiment. Guadalcanal was where Japanese troops were terrified not by individual American fighters, but by the systematic, overwhelming, relentless application of firepower and material resources. They learned that courage and sacrifice were meaningless against an enemy whose supplies never ran out, whose artillery never stopped firing, and whose industrial base could replace losses faster than combat could inflict them.